This is, I say, it's pretty much as usual. I'm going to hand over to John to talk, and then after John's spoken, back to me, I'll chair a Q&A, and at the end we'll have a quick bit of wrap up. Okay. So John, as our new secretary, perhaps you would like to introduce yourself and then tell us all about Gibson Delavacquerie, please.
Thank you, Keith. I'm obviously a somewhat elderly new boy, and unlike Trapnell's legal advisor, Tim Clipthorpe, I have left all that behind and find far greater satisfaction in reading the works of Anthony Powell. By way of explanation, or indeed excuse, an article in Harry Mount's Oldie magazine for last month advocated the return of the tie, probably another lost cause which I support, and I'm used to those lost causes. The same article, however, quotes Hardy Amis, who said, "The way you dress is a mark of the respect in which you hold those people whom you are going to meet that day. I have great respect for the members of this society and their knowledge, and I anticipate that I shall be corrected later, and indeed I probably ask more questions than I answer." I've chosen to talk about Gibson Delavacquerie, whom I doubt features in your top 10 or even top 20 characters in dance. He did not even make it to the television adaptation, but I think he has greater significance than that. By way of preliminary, I quote Nicholas Jenkins in The Acceptance World: "All human beings, driven as they are at different speeds by the same furies, are at close range equally extraordinary." And Nicolas Poussin wrote, "Things of perfection must not be looked at in a hurry, but with time, judgment, and understanding. Judging them requires the same process as making them." I hope that I have given enough time to this, but no doubt I have not, as there is always much more to be said. In 1995, and so before Jeremy Warren's exhibition, the Wallace Connection published a book by Richard Beresford on Poussin's painting. These are a few thoughts from that book. The four figures are painted in the typically traditional way, showing the progression from labour to wealth, to pleasure, to poverty. This is the wheel of fortune. On the first page of "Oh, How the Wheel Becomes It," Powell remarks that the wheel of fortune may be turned through 90 degrees to produce a roulette wheel. Life is purely a matter of chance. However, the painting couples the wheel of fortune with another classical idea, the cosmic dance, so that the cycle of human destiny is portrayed within the context of the cycle of time, the ancient metaphor of the harmony of the spheres. Time itself is the controlling influence, not fortune. The figure of time in the painting is winged and naked, and so unusually not hooded and carrying a scythe, but rather as a musician playing a lyre. He bears a resemblance to Orpheus, whose music had the ability to charm all living things. There are only 4 references in Poussin's painting to in Powell's A Dance to the Music of Time, of which the first is on the first page of the first novel. The others are all in Hearing Secret Harmonies, the last novel. While musing on Ariosto's Orlando Furioso, Jenkins describes Poussin's painting and notes that the figure of time is painter's time. He is sitting down, and while he thinks the smile might be a trifle sinister, the mood is genial and composed. Jenkins concludes that a writer's time is far less relaxed, as there the naked ancient is in an internally breathless scramble with himself. And it is this second depiction which is more appropriate to Powell's dance. Sorry, Pole's dance. On the last pages of Casanova's Chinese Restaurant, Jenkins remembers Hugh Morland's approach to the life as a ghost train, slowly climbing sheer gradients, sweeping with frenzied speed into inky depths, turning blind corners from which black gibbering bogies leap to attack, rushing headlong towards iron-studded doors, threatened by imminent collision, fingered by spectral hands, moving at last with dreadful, ever-increasing momentum towards the shape that lies across the line. In the kindly ones, they also discuss life as a carnival. It is more like blind man's buff. One reels through the carnival in question, blundering into persons one can't see, and without much success, trying to keep hold of a few of them. In the last pages of Hearing Secret Harmonies, immediately before the final sentence, which refers to Poussin's painting, Jenkins quotes from one of his favourite works, Burton's Anatomy of Melancholy. A lengthy extract beginning, "I hear news every day, and those extraordinary rumours of war, plague, fires, thunderstorms, murders, massacres, and so on, mentioning all sorts of disasters, national and natural, as well as the ups and downs of everyday life. Imprisonment, promotions, bankruptcy, sports, plays, now comical, then tragical, and so on." The dance itself. The painting shows traditional four figures, all clearly visible to a viewer, but Powell has over 300 characters in his dance who move in and out of the narrative. This suggests to me one of those dances involving several couples, each of whom take the lead for a time, the lead then passing to another couple. Example are square dances and similar folk dances, the Sir Roger de Coverley, the Lancers, and various quadrilles. All these dances are sequential figures or steps, but all of them are fairly formal and do not reflect the higgledy-piggledy society which Powell describes. So I like the nonsense of the lobster quadrille in Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, which might be seen as representing the dance of life, where individuals are thrown into situations without knowing the steps, and reflecting the wild, chaotic nature of human society. I'm happy to do this because Powell frequently refers to some of Carroll's creations, Widmerpool as the Frog Footman, Madame Dubuisson as the Mad Hatter, Mrs. Fettiplace-Jones as the Red Queen, even Bithell as a cross between the Walrus and the Carpenter, and Jenkins as Alice. Gibson Delavacquerie is not particularly significant to the plot, to the movement of the dance, but performs some significant sequential figures or steps in its structure. In her character index, Hilary Spurling, probably justifiably, allows him barely more space than Bilson, and gives him about a quarter of the space allocated to Rolf Arnold. In the television adaptation, he did not appear at all. I deal with him in stages. First, his character. Second, the figures or steps divided as to links with whom he dances and echoes the others in the dance. Third, structure and plot. So who is he? Although he only appears in Hearing Secret Harmonies, the final volume of Dance, and not referred to earlier, he is a sleeper, as Jenkins says that he has known him casually before the 1970s, in which this volume is set, but then moving backwards and forwards through time is not unusual through the sequence of novels in Dance. Described as small, very dark, still bearing marks of French origins, talking in a quick, harsh, oddly attractive voice, between bouts of almost crippling inertia, according to himself, he was immensely energetic in all that he did. As an echo, while talking to Matilda Donners over the photographs of the 7 deadly sins, Jenkins also claims that he is subject to bouts of feeling fed up with life. He and Jenkins developed their friendship through the Magnus Donners Prize Committee, by which time he has acquired some fame as a poet. Matilda asserted, no doubt truly, that the company were rather proud of employing in one of the departments a poet of his distinction. A Donners Brebner director had remarked that he displayed the same grasp of business matters that he certainly brought to literary criticism, adding that he could have risen to a post of considerably greater responsibility in the company had he wished. However, a relatively subordinate position in PR, more congenial in the nature of his duties, which tied him less to the office, allowing him more time for his own work. He is peculiarly fitted to the role as a sort of unofficial secretary to the Board of Judges, having been one of the very few, possibly only, person to have been awarded a Donners Brebner Fellowship, for which he attended an English university. He somehow slipped through Sillery's fingers just before the outbreak of war. During the war, he had served in the Middle East and India with the Royal Signals, and after leaving the army worked for a time in shipping. No doubt his connection with the company through the fellowship played his part in securing him a job as Donners Brebner. It is fair to say that he is unique in dance, as he is fully established in both the world of power and the world of imagination. In the first world, he is effective as Donners Brebner and in the prize committee. As to the second, why we don't have any examples of his poetry and rely on references to his reputation, we can see his obvious interest in words as a poet. In his remark, the smallest alteration in a poem or novel can change the whole emphasis, whole meaning. And in his enthusiasm for the song In Thieves' Cant from the Roaring Girl, which I do not think I can pronounce. Contrast him with Ralph Barnby, who is only a bridge between these worlds. In Briar's Market, it describes the issue which frequently fascinated Jenkins. Barnby's life's unusual variety of form provided a link between what I came in due course to recognise as the world of power, represented, for example, by the ambitions of Widmerpool and Truscott, and that imaginative life in which a painter's time is of increasing necessity largely spent, the imagination in such a case being primarily of a visual kind. In the conquest of Mrs. Wentworth, however, other spheres had inevitably to be invaded by him. Those hinterlands are frequently, even compulsively crossed at one time or another by almost all who practice the arts, usually in the need to earn a living. But the arts themselves, by their ultimately sensual essence, are in the long run inimical to those who pursued power for its own sake. Conversely, the artist who traffics in power does so, if not necessarily disastrously, at least at considerable risk. Delavacquerie is an outsider, in part because he is a foreigner, and there are few foreigners in dance, apart from the military attaches. Fopper and Jackie Bragadin merely provide the background scenery for action. General Flores, whom Jenkins likes as a master of charm, and is obviously firm and powerful, traits which appeal to him, possibly because they're ones which he cannot claim. And possibly Jenkins feels the same link with Flores as with Bob Duport, if to a lesser extent, because they were all tromped by Jean Templar. Louis Glober, an American who might be considered to combine some imagination with power through publishing and filmmaking, and as a man of action with his racing cars, He also has a connection with Polly Duport, possibly or presumably of the casting couch variety. I shall deal later in greater detail with a very different American, Russell Gwinnett. Delavacquerie is a British national, although this is complicated by also being of French descent. But he is not someone whose family simply crossed the Channel. His was an established family settled in the Caribbean for several generations, a century and a half. Why his ancestors arrived over there, we do not know. It would have been immediately after the Napoleonic era, so perhaps they left France or another of its colonies in protest against the returning Bourbons. It appears that his forename is his mother's maiden name and therefore possibly English. His country of birth is unclear. He is variously described as being from an island in the Caribbean, the Antilles, and as Cajun. This part of the world is a hotchpot, a medley, a melting pot, and similar stale metaphors of all races and peoples from many backgrounds, arriving there through European religious and colonial wars, the slave trade and conquest. Some islands are, or were, under the rule of one nation, although previously under the rule of another. This history underlines his sense of isolation. He says, "I like it over here, but England isn't my country. I'm rootless. I'm not grumbling about being rootless, especially these days. It even has advantages. At the same time, problems are raised too. I'm never sure how much I understand people over here." He also confesses he never likes bitter, although whether that's a true test of being English, I'm not entirely sure. He is not an outsider in the same sense as the eponymous Albert Camus character in the novel published about 30 years before Hearing Secret Harmonies, as he participates fully in society. And he is unlike both Quiggin and Widmerpool, who are outsiders from relatively poor backgrounds, who drove themselves into the world of power. Jenkins consider it worthwhile to note that Delavacquerie likes women, gets on well with them. His poetry shows that, but he never appeared in public with any particular lady. So with whom does he dance? There's Nicholas Jenkins. Obviously Delavacquerie is a friend of his, both literary and seemingly personal, although apparently they never meet other than for lunch on neutral ground. I wonder whether he is an echo, however faint, of Hugh Morland, Jenkins' closest friend earlier in dance. Did Powell plan for him before Morland died, or was he an emergency entry to fill a possible gap? A gap which I do not really see, other than perhaps as an additional link to Gwinnett. Jenkins muses that both Morland and Delavacquerie cling to privacy. When thinking about Delavacquerie, Jenkins notes that the friendships of later life, in contrast with those negotiated by 30, are apt to be burdened with reservations, constraints, inhibitions. This is presumably between those two friends, even if Jenkins does not contrast them directly. He is friendly with Matilda Donners, who is older than him, and was possibly her lover for a short time. Their friendship is certainly very close. She finds him useful in keeping her up to date with affairs at Donner's Brebner, her late husband's company. It is Matilda who properly introduces him to Jenkins, or to be more accurate, to us, as secretary to the Magnus Donner's Prize Committee and as is its link to the company. The other members of the panel of judges are Emily Brightman, whom Jenkins first encountered in Venice in Temporary Kings, and Mark Members, whom Jenkins had known since the university. Delavacquerie can hold his own both intellectually and characteristically firmly with Emily Brightman. But, to quote, Members and Delavacquerie outwards well disposed towards each other, anyway conversationally, were not much in sympathy at base. Delavacquerie, and here I would add being French, formal as always at base, may all the same have revealed on some occasion his own sense of mutual disharmony. If so, Members was now getting his own back. Delavacquerie, recognising that, smiled. 2 points here. One is the elegance of Powell's writing in those few lines, but also I see an echo of Delavacquerie grimly smiling later when thinking of Fiona Cutt's abrupt departure, leaving no message but merely a request to send her Gwynnett's copy of Middleton's plays. There is another echo with the smile on the face of the figure of time in Poussin's painting. Then there is Russell Gwynett, the winner of the Magnus Donner's Prize for his Death's Head Swordsman, a biography of Trapnell. Its epigraph is a quotation from the Revenger's Tragedy, attributed to Tourneur, or nowadays Middleton, and Gwynett ends his acceptance speech with a quotation from the same play. He likes Delavacquerie and the feeling is mutual. They meet while making arrangements for the prize, but their relationship develops through their interest in Jacobean drama. Delavacquerie takes Gwynett to see The Humorous Lieutenant, a so-called comedy by John Fletcher, in which Polly Duport plays the female lead and which Gwynett enjoys. Emily Brightman describes Gwynett at some length in Temporary Kings. A small fragment from the comparatively exclusive and cavernous grottos of Gothic America. Most significantly, she talks of an incident with a girlfriend of his who seemingly committed suicide, and he then broke into the place where her body was. She remarks he likes death. Jenkins punningly suggests halfway between Henry Adams and Charles Adams, an historian and a cartoonist. After the prize dinner, Gwynett then returns, researching for his next book, The Gothic Symbolism of Mortality in the Texture of Jacobean Statecraft. Delavacquerie observes that Gwynett, when writing about Trapnell, saw himself as Trapnell. Now writing about Gothic Jacobean plays, Gwynett sees himself as a character in one of them. When discussing Pamela Widmerpool's suicide in the same seedy hotel as Gwynett's, chosen by him because it was one of Trapnell's haunts, Delavacquerie asks Jenkins, "Tell me, Nicholas, did not Pamela Widmerpool take an overdose that she might be available to the necrophilic professor?" Jenkins agreed that it seemed very likely. They then go on to discuss how far Gwynett, with his book, avenged Trapnell for Pamela's destruction of his first novel and consequent downfall, and whether the book was also Widmerpool's revenge on Pamela. Delavacquerie has a role in enticing Gwynett to participate in a rite at the Devil's Fingers through Fiona, sent by Murtlock to ask Delavacquerie to reveal where Gwynett is living. She admits that she is tired of life in the cult, but needs a formal release from Murtlock. Delavacquerie at first refuses to give Gwynett's address, but after patiently spending hours with Fiona, even though she doesn't talk things over, she's incapable of that, he negotiates her liberation on Murtlock's condition that both Gwynett and she participate in a ritual intended to raise Dr. Trelawney from the dead. Polly Duport is the next character to consider. She is Delavacquerie's eventual wife. She is nice. We are told that more than once. The actor at the Royal Academy dinner describes Polly and Delavacquerie as two of the nicest people. Polly's mother, Jean, is definitely not nice, nor is Widmerpool, as Jenkins realizes when he is asked to describe him to Mrs. Conyers in that Lady Molly's. Like lot and got, not is one of those words which one was told at school never to use, even though it is fairly clear what it means. Polly's niceness is, for example, shown in her care for her father, despite his unattractive character. Dedicated as a nun to her career as an actor, and echoing Generals Conyers and Liddermont, as well as de Gaulle, in their approach to military service, in believing that a career must take priority over personal considerations. I suspect that her short marriage to an actor ended in divorce because of this attitude. We do not know how she met Delavacquerie, but possibly through his interest in Elizabethan and Jacobean drama. He only reveals his friendship with her to Jenkins when he says that he has taken Gwyneth to see the humorous lieutenant, but Jenkins already knows of the friendship and reflects that this echoes how Morland did not mention his relationship with Matilda when challenged to name 3 women whom he might marry, but then took him to see her in the Duchess of Malfi by way of introducing them. Jenkins omits to mention that when asked the same question by Morland, he did not name Jean Duport, with whom at the time he was in love. So this is not a matter of the reservations which occur in friendship made in later life, but one of secrecy. Another echo, of course, is that both those plays are Jacobean. When telling Jenkins of her forthcoming wedding to Delavacquerie, she looked very pleased, but at the same time a little sad. Jenkins adds that there had been quite a bit of sadness to surmount, which I take to refer to the effects of Delavacquerie's somewhat nebulous friendship with Fiona Cutts. Turning to Fiona Cutts, Delavacquerie was ignorant of the extent to which she is a handful for her parents, who were unlikely or unable to keep track of her boyfriends, although in time he seemed to have established a more effective relationship with Fiona than any her family achieved. Delavacquerie's son Etienne, for a short while her boyfriend, was too dull for her, and she moved into the Murtlock cult, becoming involved in highly distasteful goings-on in the ritual at the Devil's Fingers. During his son's relationships with Fiona, Delavacquerie became increasingly interested in her, although not in love, or so he claimed. Is this Betchman-like late flowering lust in a different context, as there would have been around 20 years difference in their ages? But then Fiona in the end goes on to marry Gwyneth, who is only marginally younger than Delavacquerie, and General Conyers married someone 20 years younger than he, so I cannot make much of that. The possibility of a temporary runaround with Fiona appeals to Delavacquerie, although this would not have been really possible because of his relationship with Polly, which was sufficiently important for the two of them to visit his Cajun relations when they were contemplating marriage. The visit crystallized the situation, at least temporarily, as they did not marry then but continued living separately. This situation continued when Fiona escaped from the cult and lived in Delavacquerie's flat, although not with him, buggering up his friendship with Polly, as he remarks. Jenkins later surmises that despite his protestations, he, Delavacquerie, is in love with Fiona, so making his suggestion to her parents that she has married him is not entirely unreasonable. Fiona's departure from his flat, leaving no message, is to say the least rude and ungrateful, considering how Delavacquerie has supported her in her escape from the cult. Delavacquerie's link with Widmerpool arises out of his role with the Magnus Donner's Prize Committee. He is concerned that Widmerpool, as a trustee of the fund which provides the substantial prize, might object to the publication of Death's Head Swordsman because of Gwyneth's relationship with Pamela. He persuades the committee to let him approach Widmerpool to obtain approval. There is no difficulty, as Widmerpool does not care, and at the prize dinner makes a rambling speech to that effect. Widmerpool had made the initial effort to get in touch with Gwynedd through Canon Fenno in order to show off his cult in action. Scott Murtlock, formerly Leslie, is thoroughly, even gothically unpleasant, and by now leader of their combined cult. He tries to contact Gwynedd. Both Widmerpool and he are fascinated by him, who, because of Pamela Widmerpool's suicide, has won quite a name for himself in occult circles by having allegedly taken part in an act of great magical significance, almost making magical history by the release of sexual energy, in short, by direct contact with the dead. Delavacquerie, discussing Gwynedd, says to Jenkins, "The cult with its rites and hierarchies is all as near as you can get nowadays to the Gothicism of which he is writing. He feels that this one offers a more Jacobean setting through certain of its specific characteristics. Gwynedd disapproves of the cult as one of its tenets is that harmony, power, death are all more or less synonymous, not desire and death like Shakespeare. Gwynedd disapproves of death being, so to speak, removed from the romantic associations of love, which is his own approach with which his book deals, to be prostituted to the vulgar purposes of power, and pseudo-magical power at that. Love and literature should rank before sorcery and power. Murtlock is a Gothic character, seen to the life, as Jenkins puts it, when Gwynedd quotes a verse from Cupid's Tragedy by Beaumont and Taylor. It starts, "Take heed, this is your mother's scorpion, that carries sting even in his tears, whose soul is a rank poison thorough, touch not at him." Turning now to echoes, which are people whom Delavacquerie never meets. There's obviously Hugh Morland, who speaks appreciatively of Delavacquerie's poetry in connection with one of his favourite themes, the artist as businessman. "I never pay my insurance policy without envisaging the documents going through the hands of Beardsley and Kafka before being laid on the desk of Wallace Stevens." Then, as a twirl in the dance, 20 pages later, Delavacquerie quotes Wallace Stevens anonymously as an American poet. "Death is the mother of beauty." Stevens is known for his interest in the relationship between imagination and reality, in other words, imagination and power. We have already seen Morland echoed by Delavacquerie in his friendship with Jenkins and in Matilda, Morland's former wife. Another is his interest in Elizabethan Jacobean drama. During his last meetings with Jenkins, he confesses to being haunted, if not to the extent of Murtlock, by the story of Lady Widmerpool's suicide, and quotes a verse from the Dutch courtesan beginning, "The dark is my delight, so 'tis the nightingale's," which sounds charming and pleasant, but out of the context of the play, he concludes that she, the Dutch courtesan, wasn't a very nice person, and ends the play being whipped and jailed. Is there an echo of the two castration stories told by Morland in Delavacquerie's story of a young woman's loss of virginity, on which he remarks, "In due course you find that really girls are perfectly well able to look after themselves, most," and then makes a punning updated version of an old Arabic saying, "The dogs bark, the caravel takes off." A caravel was a French jet plane equivalent to the British Comet, and he substitutes the modern vehicle for the original caravan. I mentioned this as an odd remark, but Powell was keen on wordplay, as in Jenkins' to Adams comment. Morland cannot take such a positive view of his stories. Is this male anxiety contrasted with female agency, as seen in Delavacquerie's story? Certainly both men find their respective stories intriguing. There is an echo of Delavacquerie's remark in The Fisher King when Henchman observes, women can be unexpectedly tough. I idly wonder whether this is Powell speaking. Apart from being the subject of Gwynnett's biography, there is no clear echo of Trapnell with Delavacquerie, but his death's head sword stick is certainly reminiscent of Jacobean revenge tragedies. He regards the head as being Boris Karloff in a horror movie and latter-day Gothic. Turning to Delavacquerie and the plot of Dance, there are two places where Delavacquerie has an impact on the progress of the story. Since the novel is told from Jenkins' point of view in the first person, in neither of them do we know what is actually said. First, he talks to Widmerpool to seek permission to publish Death's Head Swordsman, which he tackles as a matter of pride in his role as a man of power. It is my own self-esteem that prompts me to attempt this. That is what I am like. I want to come back to the Magnus Donner's prize committee and inform them that Lord Widmerpool is perfectly agreeable to Death's Head Swordsman receiving the award. But he is pushing at an open door, as Widmerpool does not object. The other is in connection with the negotiations over Fiona's release from the cult. Murtlock knows that Gwynnett is in the country, even if he claims not to have traced him. He may, in any case, have preferred a more tortuous approach. Delavacquerie adds, when explaining his initial refusal to help Murtlock, I felt it an imposition on the part of this young visionary, whatever he claims as a magician, to force his abracadabras onto an American scholar engaged over here on research of a serious kind, however idiosyncratic Gwyneth's own sexual tastes might be. We do not know whether Murtlock is dissembling over his demand. Possibly Powell has to set up a connection, using a Simon Barnes terminology, through which Fiona is to be released from the cult if Murtlock really did know where to find Gwynnett. They could have negotiated directly on the issue. After all, Delavacquerie achieved Fiona's release only at the cost of Gwynnett being present at the rite at the Devil's Fingers, which is probably what Gwynnett wanted to achieve, even if he disagreed with Murtlock's use of the ritual and was stunned by the event and the turn it took. It seems to me that in both situations, Delavacquerie is not essential to the progress of the plot. In the first, anyone could have approached Widmerpool, and in the other, Murtlock should have spoken directly to Gwynnett. I shall now come clean that I am intrigued by the recurring appearance of the Gothic in Dance. The word is frequently used throughout Dance, from the opening of A Question of Upbringing, where Jenkins refers to Eton College, and in particular amongst the characters whom I have mentioned. In the last novel, almost all of the quotations are from Jacobean or Elizabethan plays. Why is this topic, in which both are interested, a link between Delavacquerie and Gwynnett, who, while writing of the Gothic, wishes to become deeply involved in it, in the same way that he became involved in Trapnell's life when writing of him? I think because Delavacquerie is more capable of seeing the drama for what it is, a portrayal of life and not life itself. Gwynnett has an obsession which appears to be more than purely academic. Delavacquerie, it appears, never talks to Murtlock face to face, but he, Murtlock, behaves as a leading character in a revenge tragedy, and his theatrical dress and general appearance is reminiscent of the Jacobean theatre. So why is Delavacquerie in this novel, in Dance, other than because of a Trapnell-like argument that Powell, who as the novelist is God, and puts him there? I think that he is part of an overarching theme of Dance, the imposition of order onto the lobster grill of society. The ultimate aim of art is to order discordant elements, to explore conflict in order to resolve it, He is the nice guy who seeks to bring harmony to those whom he encounters, almost an Orpheus-like figure. And of course, if I am wrong, I can, in my defence, rely on Powell's sentence in his introduction to Hilary Spurling's invitation to the dance. It is an aspect of novels which has always fascinated me, the prerogative of the reader to make an individual judgment, not necessarily the author's, on characters and events. Thank you for listening.
That's great. Thank you very much, John. Interesting connections made there. Right. So, question and answers. Discussion. Who wants to start us off? I'll remind you, if you would use the raise your hand button. So that I can, because there's more than one screen of you for me to look at. Anybody? Nobody wants to talk. Nobody? Well, one thing I'll say is that, and John sort of alluded to this, that I rather like Fiona, that I don't have that less than 100% opinion of her. I agree that leaving Delavacquerie's flat without a by your leave is somewhat rude, yes. But she's always struck me right from the beginning when I first read Dance as a rather more sympathetic character than perhaps is portrayed. We got some raised hands. John Blackster first, and then Jill.
I enjoyed that very much. Thank you, John. But I would just like to say how interesting it was that you reminded us of the opening of the whole sequence of Dance with the description of Eton College as being Gothic, which I'd sort of rather forgotten, but it does tie things together from beginning to end sort of very neatly. I mean, obviously, whether or not he's referring to the fact that quite a lot of the architecture, particularly Eton Chapel, is actually in the Gothic style, or whether it's more the mist rolling up from the Thames on an autumn, late cold autumn afternoon, or just for general, I don't know, sort of loneliness and sort of gloom of boarding schools. I'm not sure, but I did appreciate that. I must say, Delavacquerie has never really been a character that I've felt that interested in, and not particularly sympathetic. But this has certainly widened my appreciation. So thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Jill.
Yes, I echo my thanks. That was really interesting. Thank you very much. I mean, I've always felt that Delavacquerie fulfills certain roles for Dance because of when he appears, and also if we're looking at it, this is post Second World War. There were a lot of people from the Caribbean who had come to Britain during and towards the end of the war. Some of whom indeed had been in the services. And became artists and poets and writers, and Powell would undoubtedly have met some of them. So I'm not saying Delavacquerie is a particular character, but I do think he symbolises a new post-war phase in artistic life in Britain. But also he's a second half of life friend. I think you implied that the kind of friends that Jenkins makes in his earlier life, they've all been close to his crowd. Now we're moving into he's very keen on Delavacquerie. He's attractive. He finds him an attractive character, I mean, they don't spend a lot of time together, but he keeps saying, Jenkins says, I'm always pleased to see him. He's always a character. So I think he's a useful, apart from the plot devices that you described about moving the story on, which is absolutely right. I think he's intended to be representative of the kind of friendships that one makes later in life, people that one might not have been friendly with earlier along. So thank you very much, because there were some good connections there that I hadn't thought about.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. John, anything to say in response to any of that?
No. I mean, the only thing is that he came over for a slightly different reason, in the sense that he won the fellowship. So he was here before the war. But the point which Jill makes is still very good, valid. And I do see him as a paler reflection of Morland. He certainly, as Jill said, doesn't spend as much time with him.
Simon.
Well, I think that was excellent. Thank you, John. I think John and Jill, just in that exchange, have probably said what I was going to say, but in a I think you said it in a much better way. I think Delavacquerie, I actually really like him as a character, but then I see him as I don't know, potentially as a substitute for Penniston in the war stories, and maybe substitute for Barnby and Morland. So I think he's definitely a device to move the books along. Maybe he appears later. I think somebody said a few years ago on the, apologies if that's somebody's on the call. Somebody said a few years ago on the mailing list, he's one of the last dancers to join the dance, and therefore maybe he's not sketched in as thoroughly as he might have been. But I just wondered if, John, if you had any thoughts on, because he arrives later and he's younger, is he sort of sketched in more likely because Powell hasn't had as much time to be sort of intimate with him in the same way that he might have been with Barnby and Morland, as in he just wasn't around for long enough.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, almost I wonder whether Powell would have been better off not to have let Morland die when he did. I mean, he's the same age as Jenkins, isn't he? Or certainly the same generation. No, I certainly like Delavacquerie as a character, not merely because he's described as nice. I think he's unusual, and as I say, I think he's an outsider because he is unusual, and for the reasons which Jill outlined. I mean, there's so much to think about with these chaps, isn't there?
Paul Milliken.
Yeah, thank you, John. You made the point early on that Delavacquerie is unique, I think, in that he combines the world of the imagination as an established poet with the world of power as an able administrator, which is interesting that Powell brings these two things together in one character at the end. It's reckoned that Roy Fuller was an inspiration for the character, because Fuller was very unusual. He was a friend of Powell's, and Powell dedicated the Soldier's Art to Fuller. And Fuller was both a solicitor and very able administrator and an award-winning poet. He was professor of poetry, I think, at Oxford at one point. But where on earth does the name Gibson Delavacquerie come from? I mean, what an extraordinary name. I mean, V.S. Naipaul possibly contributed something to the Caribbean flavour, and the surname Delavacquerie, I was actually looking it up while you were speaking on Wikipedia, and it's a very uncommon surname in France, known around the Normandy area. But Gibson Delavacquerie, extraordinary. Any idea, John, why he struck on such an unusual name?
There are two things. I think Gibson probably is English.
Yeah.
And there were obviously, but you say the Normandy area. I mean, I have a thing about a group of people called the Acadians, who left France, Poitou and Normandy, and were set up in Canada till the British booted them out, and some of them went back to France. and either from there, France, or from Canada, they went to the Caribbean area, including Louisiana.
Right.
So, I mean, I haven't looked up to see, well, maybe we should pursue that, go to Louisiana to see if there are any there.
One of the other things that it's worth thinking about is that Gibson is a surname,
Yes,
and an awful lot of people from the Caribbean have surnames as first names,
yeah,
and that, I believe, goes back to the influence of slave owners, and they were often named after, you know, the slave owner or whatever. And so, yeah, I mean, that may be another route.
yeah.
John Walters.
I find Gibson a very attractive character too, but I think of him as a kind of junior version of Nick. You know, if Morland was still around, he couldn't really be a protagonist in the way that Delavacquerie is, because Delavacquerie has, you know, these unrequited love affairs, this sort of on-off, slightly mysterious relationships. He's a widower. He can have a much more. He's got much more of an emotional life and stake in the plot of Hearing's Secret Harmonies than Nick can ever have. Nick has to have this role of rather avuncular role, really. You know, he's a man of letters. No, he can't, and Powell doesn't want him to have an emotional relationship in the way that Gibson Delavacquerie can. You know, is actually we get the impression he tangles with some of the main characters in a really interesting way, and he's also becomes a narrator of some of those events. That it's extremely useful to the plot, maybe more than it's completely convincing. But I enjoyed that element of it, and I think, you know, if there hadn't been a character like that, it would have been very difficult to have more anonymous proxies and reports.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I hadn't thought about that about his relationships, because clearly Nicholas Jenkins is very happily married, so he couldn't go down that route. Hugh Morland seems to be established with Mrs. McClintock, and no, yeah, no, I like that.
Yeah, I think I agree with John that, I mean, Morland would not have worked in that
No.
situation. Yeah. Anybody else? Anything else? Bernard.
Yeah, just very briefly, I just wanted to say very much for a really stimulating talk. However many times I've gone through dance, Gibson is one of these characters that sort of flashed by the side on the hard shoulder for me. And the only real memory of him that I have looking back is his slightly mischievous side when he's withholding the manuscript when he's presenting it, and Dr. Brightman is desperately keen to get it off him, and he's desperately keen not to let her have it, and that's my abiding memory of him, and this whole idea of him being bridging the worlds of imagination and power, I think is really excellent. So, John, thank you so much for that talk. Whilst you were doing it, I was just quickly having a look, because my life has been beset by AI recently, and I was just doing a little AI search on Gibson Delavacquerie, and the Google AI tool, whatever it's called, tells me that he's clearly based on the French writer and intellectual Andre Malraux. Now, I know that the whole idea of attributing characters to real life people is highly divisive in the society, and I don't want to raise that one particularly, but this is not someone I've come across before, and it's not an idea that I'd ever heard before. But is that something that you'd come across in your reading or research when you were preparing this really excellent talk?
No, I hadn't. I mean, I thought Malraux was the previous century.
1901 to 1976, apparently.
Right, okay.
I'm reading, not knowing.
No.
Certainly never cropped up anywhere that I'm aware of when we've been researching the sort of possible character models.
Excellent. Well, if that just dissuades people from using AI, that's an excellent outcome.
Okay. Sorry, John.
I was only going to point out that it only requires somebody to say something which might be complete nonsense somewhere, and if the AI picks it up, because it's a little bit like, well, I don't know, fool's gold. It's something that glitters, it picks it up, but where it's picked it up from and what it is. I mean, other things that I do know about, I've found the most extraordinary half-truths and complete nonsense, because somewhere or somebody has put something and the AI search has thrown it up.
Yeah, I mean,
so presumably somebody at some time has written that or put it somewhere where it can be accessed.
There's an awful lot of rubbish out there that gets picked up by AI. And I see occasional pieces of stupidity being reported. Elwyn.
No, actually, out of coincidence, I'm actually reading Malraux at the moment, having read one and now reading another, and don't make the connection in the slightest. I mean, he's writing in the 20s and 30s. He's writing these highly political books set in which you would guess that wouldn't be to Powell's taste at all, set in revolutionary China. I mean, they're quite interesting from a historical point of view, but I don't make the connection with a character like Delavacquerie in the slightest. Later, this chap Malraux becomes some sort of politician under de Gaulle, Minister of Culture or whatever, and has some sort of role in that regard. But I just don't see it. So that could be one of your AI fails, possibly.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? Anything else? A couple of things I will say by way of sort of announcements and so on. I'm sure everybody is aware that we've now released the 6th and probably final volume of AP's journalism, The Lost Heinemann Files, and Christmas with Kafka, edited by Robin Bino, as usual. It's now in the shop, online. You can order it. Anybody who already has ordered it, and I've got the order, please be patient. I have a huge bundle to process and ship out, and if I'm lucky, I will get that done, over the weekend. If I don't get it done over the weekend, next week is a lost cause. But yeah, we will certainly try and get them out over the weekend. Yeah, okay. The next one of these talks is Jill Bennett on the 8th of April, Wednesday, same time. Jill's going to talk to us about Agnes Donners, which I think might be rather interesting. And before that, on Saturday, the 28th of March, 2 o'clock UK time, we've got our usual quarterly open social call on Zoom, with the initial purpose, at least, of picking up whatever anybody wants to talk about from the most recent newsletter. So yeah, that's me by way of announcements. Bernard, as chairman, any comments, announcements, whatever?
No comments or announcements at the moment. I've been out of IT reach in Scotland for the last couple of weeks. The main thing is planning for a conference in 13 months' time, which will be the first post-COVID conference. in Edinburgh. So this isn't really an advert for it, but just maybe the tiniest of thumbs up or heads up to say keep the 7th to 9th or 9th to 11th, I can't remember, April.
7th to 9th, I think. Whatever that Friday,
yeah, that
Sunday
Sunday anyway. Keep it free, as there may well be a very exciting Edinburgh conference with stunning accommodation, buildings, and a very good Sunday visit as well, penciled in. Though obviously it's still quite early on in its planning. That's the main thing that's been occupying me from the AP world in the last few weeks.
John Moisson, any as secretary, anything you want to throw into the fray? No. John Blackster.
Just following on from Bernard, I don't think Mike Jay's been with us this evening, but the John Aubrey weekend that he's instigated is also lots of phone calls and coach companies being contacted and so on. So that does seem to be going ahead. What we really do need, if there are people here who've expressed interest, we're going to put it out, and then it will be very helpful if we get pretty definite reactions straight away. Numbers are very important with this, because somewhere we want to dine in Oxford will only take 25. We've got 30 plus. We're assuming that some will drop out. So just keep your eyes open and react immediately. And then hopefully we can get all that sorted out. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, John. Thank you, everybody. And thank you, John Moisson, for what was a very interesting talk, and reminded me of all the connections with Alice in Wonderland, which I had overlooked for a while. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Hope to see you again in a month's time. Thank you.
Very good.
Bye.
Bye.